Now, if you tuned in 2 weeks ago, you'll have noticed we had some technical challenges because we're trying out this new package because the Google Hangouts no longer exists. So do bear with us tonight as we give it another go. The great thing is that if you kind of tuned in and missed bits and words and phrases from Colin's excellent session, then that has been re-recorded and you can access that on the Broadcast Network website. So please make time to listen to that because I think you'll really get the full understanding of what he was trying to convey. That, of course, was the biblical basis for pioneering, and tonight it's really exciting. Like I said, we have the second part of what does it look like in reality. So tonight, like I said, this is where the rubber hits the road, as my father used to say. In a moment, I'm going to hand you over to Colin, who's going to introduce you to Matt Simmonds. Matt and his wife have been in Amsterdam for the last 2 years, where they have been pioneering a church plant there with, I believe they've got 4 daughters. So they've been there the last 2 years, and so we're looking forward to hearing a real experience of what that looks like. Before I hand over to you though, Colin, I just want to remind you that this is still interactive. We're live, we're listening, and we're ready to take your questions. So I've not heard Matt and Jo's story, so I'll be listening in and hoping to glean some insight and wisdom. And but we want to dig deeper with Matt when he's finished his chat with Colin, and hopefully Jo will join us. At the moment, she's been delayed at a primary school event, I think, so hopefully we'll get her in at the tail end. But if you've got those questions, then please type them in on your control panel. You'll see a little heading with questions. I'll be able to see them as normal, and then we'll be able to put them to Matt at the end of his chat with Colin. So to hand over now, so I'm going to give you over to Colin, and then we're going to hear what Matt and Jo have to share with us this evening. Thanks, guys.
Hiya, Matt. It's good to see you. It's good to interview you. Just so that people get an understanding of who you are and your family, why don't you just give us a little synopsis of your children, your wife, and where you live in?
Yep, I'm Matt, obviously married to Jo. Sorry she couldn't be here this evening. Well, hopefully she'll arrive at some point, but she had to go into the kids' school for a couple of meetings. We've got 4 daughters. Our youngest is Millie. She's 4, coming up to 5 years old. Anwin is 6, 7 in a month's time. Lydia's, I've got to do this well. Okay, she's 8, coming up towards 9, and Ellie is 10, heading on towards 11. We moved to Amsterdam from the Netherlands. We moved here in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, 2 years ago from Brighton, England. So our kids would have been obviously 2 years younger. So Millie would have only been 2 at that point. Ellie, our oldest, would have been 8. So that's a brief synopsis of who we are.
Fabulous, and fabulous to get the ages. I've got 3. I would have done well to do what you've done. So just give us a little bit of a background then before we kind of talk a little bit about how your family have made the transition. Of how did you think about going to Amsterdam? What was the kind of history to get you to Amsterdam?
Yeah, Jo and I had talked about pioneering and church planting even from when we very first met, from before we were even married. It's something that we talked about and separately God had put on our hearts. And then as we got married in the kind of the early years of our marriage, we dreamed about it and came up with ideas and plans. And we were in Bedford at the time. We moved to Brighton to join CCK Church across the King of Brighton. I was responsible for running New Day, which is the big youth event that New Frontiers runs, a kind of week conference every summer. And I did that for about 10 years. And some of those kind of dreams that we had began to get a little bit squashed, and God suddenly dramatically broke in about 5 years ago now and spoke to us quite directly and kind of shook us up a little bit, but particularly about moving to mainland Europe to continental Europe to be involved in church planting, which was, we'd always assumed it would either be somewhere in England or even further overseas. We never actually thought of Europe at all. So it came as a bit of a surprise. And then God began to speak to us about the Netherlands, and we kind of just picked Amsterdam as the first place you think of when you think of Holland. You think, well, obviously Amsterdam. So we came here, spent a weekend here just nearly 5 years ago. We loved it, loved the city, loved the people. Came back, talked to our elders in Brighton, and they said, great, but just calm down a second, hold on. And we spent a few years there just sort of training in leadership and preparing, getting ready to go, taking on different responsibilities in the church. And then we kind of finally up sticks to move here in July 2014, so 2 years ago.
Very good. I often get asked the question, because we've moved 3 children around the country to church plant, how do you prepare the children, and especially going overseas, how did you kind of prepare 4 girls for the transition to go to Amsterdam?
Yeah, well, fortunately we went through this journey where the church we're in Brighton, CCK, about this sort of time that God first began to provoke us, it went multi-site, so from one location to several across the city. We joined kind of one of the new sites that was being launched. And as though, as grown-ups, we're able to kind of handle the concept that we're all still the same church. For kids, all of a sudden there's less people there, some of their friends aren't there, and they're in a different building, so they kind of just assume it's a new church. That's just how they thought about it. So we use that as an opportunity to begin to introduce them to the idea of moving on, and we're here starting this new multi-site, but actually we want to go and start something new in the future. So we just, even before we were certain we were actually going to go, we started to kind of lay the foundation with them. And then when it got to the time of actually leading up to seriously going, there was a song that I used to sing in the kids' work about marching around the city of Jericho, and there was a bridge in the song that went something along the lines of when God says go, we go, when God says march, we march, etc., etc. And we just said to the kids, look, very simply, God's told us to do this, and we want to be obedient to God, just like that song you sung. And kids are obviously brilliantly able to just find faith, even in simple things like that. So that's kind of how we try to do it over a kind of a couple-year period, really.
Okay, very good. So you moved with your family to Amsterdam. How many people did you know? Just tell us a little bit about the first 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, so we got in and we drove all the way from Brighton to Amsterdam through 4 countries. It takes about 8 hours, and we arrived in the city, and to be honest, we didn't really know anybody. We'd begun to gather a small team that we'd been doing a kind of a similar thing to this, like a Google Hangout, for about 6 months before, but none of those people actually lived in the city. Some of them were people in England who were also moving, and people from elsewhere in the Netherlands. And I'd met 1 or 2 people who were involved in other churches, but only very vaguely. So we arrived not knowing anybody. And then another family from England moved about 10 days later. And then about 2 months later after that, another family from England moved. And then we slowly began to gather people. But yeah, we were literally the only people there. The kids started school after a month. And our oldest 2 went to a language school, so they had some English-speaking kids with them that they could connect with who were also learning Dutch. But our Annie, who was 4 at the time, our third daughter, she just went straight into Dutch school. She just walked into the classroom and couldn't speak a word of the language. And that was a testing time for her and for us. And, you're asking lots of questions of what on earth are we doing? Why are we here? And the kids were struggling and missing their friends. And so the first few months was really just kind of pressing through it, trusting God that we were there for a reason, even when it was difficult, even when the kids were struggling. Keep bringing them back to, we are here for a reason. God said go, so we're going to go, and just kind of speaking hope into them as much as we could.
So what would be a kind of low and high time, especially for your family and your kids at that time?
Yeah, there was a couple of particularly low moments. I think sort of dropping the kids off to school could be particularly hard. I remember one time about 2 or 3 months in, cycling back, and the teacher in our daughter's class wasn't very maternal, so she would, most days Annie would be crying and the teacher just wouldn't know what to do, and we found that a struggle. And there was one day I was coming home and I was cross with this teacher for not really dealing with the situation, and I was just cross generally that this was what our life was looking like at that moment. And I remember praying and saying, God, what's going on? And God kind of spoke to me really directly from a passage in Matthew 19, when the children come to Jesus and his disciples try and shoo them away, and Jesus says, the kingdom of God belongs to people like this, to children. And God really spoke to me and said, look, I care for your children more than you do. And I thought, oh yeah, I mean, that's really obvious, but in that moment it spoke to me really powerfully. So that was a low point that God really spoke into. And then another time, we'd been there for about just over a year, and our back feet, we brought, when we moved, we had a car which we sold, and we brought what's called a back feet, which is like a cargo bike. They're really expensive, so we had to sell our car to buy it. They cost about €1,800, and that's how we get around. We don't own a car, so everywhere we go in this thing, Joe does the food shopping in it, we transport the kids around in it. It's like a people carrier on 2 wheels with no engine. And after about a year, it got stolen from outside our house. We didn't have it insured, and it was. I remember praying at the time, God, we don't have any money to buy a new one, so you've either got to give us the money so we can replace this, or give us our old one back. And they reckon every year sort of 50,000 bikes are stolen in the city. Everyone cycles here, and everyone seems to steal bikes. 50,000 bikes get stolen, and they only find like a tiny, like 0.something% of bikes ever get returned. And backfeeds, cargo bikes, because they're so expensive, they never find them. And about 5 months later, I was still praying this prayer: God, you've either got to give us the money because we don't have it, or we need our bike back. And I wrote in my journal one morning, I was just upset with a whole bunch of unanswered prayer, of which this bike thing was symbolic. And I wrote from Habakkuk, where it says, "Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you're not here?" I was really quite upset. And then I read on, and then I wrote this down from a few verses later, where God kind of answers Habakkuk and says, "Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if I told you." God spoke to me, and then the next day we got a phone call from the police saying that they'd found our bike, which was just a miracle, really. I mean, they never find these bikes, and it had been locked up just really only a few streets away. They'd obviously stolen it, locked it, and forgotten where they'd put it. So the bike hadn't been touched since it had been stolen. It was in perfect condition still. So God really answered our prayer. So that was kind of our main low point and the big high point. And after that moment of that kind of unanswered prayer being answered, then all of a sudden it like opened the floodgate, and lots of other unanswered prayers suddenly began to happen. And it was kind of from then really that the church seemed to really begin to grow, and in just lots of different ways God began to bless us from that point.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the early days in the church. How did you, what did you do? How did it affect your family?
We had a simple strategy for the first 1 year, definitely, kind of even for the first 2, where Terry Virgo had advised me. I bumped into him maybe a week or 2 after we moved. He was at another event elsewhere in the Netherlands, and he said to me, when you move house, he said, when you move overseas, you need to leave a year. It takes a year to move house, he said. So I found that really helpful. So the first year, that was kind of our main goal, was just to move house and to settle the family. So it was a few months before we really did much. Initially, all we did was eat together. So for the first few months, on a Sunday every week, sometimes midweek, we would just gather people who were beginning to connect with us and say, come out for food. And we didn't do anything other than just eat and talk to each other and just begin to build friendships. And then after about 3 months, we then, just in our apartment, kind of started a prototype service really, where we did an hour thing. The kids were upstairs in a bedroom, and we did kind of a short kind of message and a short time of worship. And then again, we would just eat together. So we'd probably be together for kind of 4 hours, but the actual kind of service element was quite short. So we just kept things really simple, tried not to put too much pressure on us to kind of deliver something that we just weren't able to deliver. But we were really deliberate in trying to gather people and try and just get our kids involved and help them to feel part of it as well.
So how many people would be gathering? And in terms of the Sunday, that's a long time on a Sunday. How did the kids cope with that?
Yes, so we were, I think probably the most we ever had in our apartment would have been about 30 people, but normally we would have been around 20, 25, of which maybe somewhere between 8 and 12 would have been children. And we've got a reasonably spacious apartment, but it was still quite a squeeze. And they were here for a long time, and often we'd have, well, pretty much every week people would be here on a Wednesday evening as well. So it does become quite tiring for the family. I mean, we'd kind of prepared our children by, we'd always try to have a home which we'd have people coming in and out of all the time. So even in Brighton, most Sundays we'd have people round. In the week, we'd often led small groups for many years, so we'd have people around. So the kids were kind of used to it. But there were times when they just, particularly our oldest, would just need some space. And we'd kind of try and just give her some opportunity, or say, look, here's some books, or here's Dad's computer, just go up and sit in the bedroom upstairs and we're out of the way. And we just gave them lots of grace when they needed space and time, even in the kind of the middle of things.
Right, wow. So just then let's move it on a little bit. So that your kind of first 6 months, year, gathering a group of people. What was the next kind of major change in terms of the church plan?
Yeah, we spent a year mostly in our apartment, and then we began to meet once a month in a venue in the city centre, which helped us to feel a little bit more like we had a bit of a plan and a bit of a purpose, but we didn't really particularly gather anybody in that season. And then we made the decision anyway to start meeting every week and do that in the morning, whereas previously we'd been meeting in the afternoon just because of difficulties with venue. And it was still probably 3 or 4 months before we got any real traction. It was hard going at first, and there'd be some weeks where you'd look around and think, oh goodness, we're kind of a small group meeting in this hall. And it felt a bit of a challenge. And I remember, there'd be a few times our kids saying, oh Dad, when are some people going to join our church? And it would feel like, oh, you don't want to hear that from your kids. But then little by little we began to kind of just add some people and get a bit of momentum. And you just have to keep persevering week after week, and celebrate just the ones and twos that come along. So we would do it with our key team. If there was even just one new person, we would make a big deal out of it, and really celebrate the win. And then that just helps you to kind of see what God's doing little by little.
So in terms of I'm swapping the questions a little bit between church and your family. In terms of holidays, in terms of being in a new nation, I know sometimes church planters find themselves so consumed with the new thing and actually strapped for cash and under a bit of pressure that sometimes they don't actually able to take breaks, and if they do, they're not quite sure how to or where to. Especially, I mean, I've lived in another nation for a couple of years. Just tell us a little bit about it in terms of the pace of, that side of your life.
Yeah, I think what we tried to do was we tried to use it as a bit of an opportunity in some ways. I'll talk about holidays in a minute, but one thing that really helped us was moving from a big, busy church like CCK in Brighton and being involved in leadership there, our diaries were just stupidly busy. You know, I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to that. So we really used the kind of the first year, 18 months of being here as a big opportunity for us as a family and as a married couple, just to say, look, we've got evening after evening where we don't have anything on. We've got weekend after weekend where we have no plans. Let's just make the most of it and really invest lots of time in our family and do as much as we could just to explore the city, and take the kids just to lots of exciting things. So we got passes to the big zoo in the city, so that we could take the kids there all the time. We got museum passes so we could go visit all the museums. So we just did loads of things to help the kids really enjoy living here. And then when it came to holidays, it is a tricky balance, because you want to go home to England and see family, but at the same time it can be a bit unsettling, and it can mean that holiday becomes driving all around the country trying to catch up with as many people as you can. So we've tried to balance doing that as well as taking some breaks here, and just taking a week away just as a family, which we've probably not done as much as that as we would like to. And we had some advice as well to not take the kids back too soon to England. So we left it a year before they went. I went back a few times for very short trips, but we left it a whole year before we took them back, to try and make sure we could get them kind of as settled as we could before they went back and saw friends and family and things. I mean, the good thing is it's not that far away, so we had lots of people come over and visit us, which helped.
No, that's very, very good advice. I've noticed even in the UK, I live in the north of England, when people come to join us, even in the same nation, if they keep going home, actually it does get them unsettled. So tell us a little bit about Amsterdam and some of the enjoying the city. What's some of the good things about Amsterdam?
Yeah, I think we found adapting to a new culture, there's obviously things that you miss. So we tried to kind of compensate for that by finding lots of things that we could enjoy. So with just food, things to do, we just tried to build kind of a big weight of things that we liked to kind of counterbalance the things that we missed. And over time, it does sort of tip the balance, and you really enjoy living here. So, I mean, one of the big benefits of a city like this is that it's made for cycling. So we cycle everywhere, and everybody cycles in this city, and it's just peaceful and relaxing. We love it. The kids love it. I mean, part of just living in any big city is there's just so much to do for families. There's zoos and museums, and there's Amsterdam has loads of wonderful art galleries and beautiful canals. So there's just so much to explore, and you get just to be a tourist in your own city, and we've just got that mentality really. Let's just enjoy as much as we can while we're here. And in Brighton, there's a few things to do, but you could kind of, as a tourist, you could do the whole thing in maybe a weekend or a week, and you could see everything. Whereas a city like this, you can be here for years and still not even scratch the surface, because there's so much to enjoy about the place. So we even now, 2 years in, we're still kind of living as tourists and just enjoying it and just embracing as much of the city as we can.
No, that is brilliant. I've often said to people who go to new cities, enjoy the city. If you love the city, you'll love the people, and you'll feel at home very quickly. In terms of language, the way you're learning language or not, or as the case may be, your kids, how does all that work?
The kids, the kids, looking back now, the kids learned really quickly. At the time, it didn't feel quick. And people had said to us things like, oh, after 6 weeks, they'll be fine. And then when it got to 6 weeks and they weren't, I remember counting down the weeks, week by week as we went, and then getting to 6 weeks and realizing they weren't. And that was a shock. But they do learn really quick. But the way that kids do it is you don't necessarily tend to notice it. All of a sudden, you'll pick them up from school and they'll be talking to somebody in the playground, and you think, what? Where did that come from? And it just kind of clicks in all of a sudden. So now, 2 years in, they're all fluent speakers. I mean, they would have been after a year, I think. Maybe probably even for the younger ones, they got it even quicker. It did mean that for their schools and studies, they were a little bit behind because they'd had to focus a bit more on language learning, so it took them a little bit longer to catch up. I mean, for Jo and I, we haven't taken any. Jo's just started taking lessons now, literally this week. She's doing a kind of intensive course, and then I'll do the same course, but probably in the new year. In the city here, everybody speaks English, and most of them speak English better than I do. So you don't need to. You can meet people who've lived here for a decade or more and don't speak a word of Dutch. And the Dutch are really happy to speak English. You can plant an English-speaking church. The 3 biggest churches in the city are all English-speaking, and yet they're still attended by maybe 50–60% of their congregations would be Dutch. So it's a wonderful opportunity. It means we were able to get started very quickly without having. I mean, and that's unique for most places you go. You don't get to skip that stage. You have to kind of invest in that. But we kind of got a sort of a get out of jail free card. We're able to kind of bypass some of those challenges.
Yeah, very good. Just tell us a little bit where the church is up to now, the last 6 months, last year.
Yep, the church has, as I said, we started meeting in a venue outside our home every week in the end of October last year. And from October through to the end of February, I think it was, we were pretty consistently sort of gathering the same number of people, some around 25, 30, including kids. We were having new people, but not in any. But they, for various reasons, they just weren't really sticking with us. And then suddenly, I mean, when you're church planning, all you sometimes need is kind of one key family or an individual or a couple to turn up, and then all of a sudden, it just gets a bit of momentum. People begin to stick. So we've gone from in February having around, I think our lowest Sunday was the last Sunday in January, and we had 20 people, including kids. And then 2 weeks ago we had 51 people. So we've pretty much doubled in size in about 7 or 8 months. So far this year we've had 120 people turn up for the first time, of which some of those would be people who are just here on holiday. We get a bit of a kind of tourist traffic of people who are just on weekend breaks who want to go to church. But a lot of those would be people in the city who are exploring us and checking us out. So things have moved forward really well. We felt like we spent 3 or 4 months kind of in first gear, and then went from first gear up of 3 or 4 gears kind of in one hit, and now things seem to be moving on really, really well. So we're really pleased.
Brilliant. We're going to have some questions in a minute. Describe that bicycle when you talk about going in gears. When I've talked to you before, because anybody not living in Amsterdam or the Netherlands probably still trying to figure out how many people can you get on this bike. What does it look like?
Yeah, it's called a backfeets or cargo bike would be the English way of saying it. So it's got a box on the front, and then a wheel on the front, and then a wheel on the back. It's only got 2 wheels still, but there's a bench which you can sit 2 on, and then there's a kind of a space in front where another one can normally squat down, and then there's a seat on the back behind the kind of the cyclist where you can put a kid as well. So when we first moved, when they're a little bit smaller, we could get all 4 of them on. Now I could probably do 3 because they're getting a bit heavy. And the bike weighs an absolute ton, even just empty. They're kind of indestructible. But they're a people carrier. They're like a kind of a big Ford or Seat thing or whatever, Ford Galaxy, but on 2 wheels with no engine. I mean, they're amazing things. They're great fun.
That's amazing. I've been to India and seen a whole family of 4 on a motorbike. It'd be great to come to Amsterdam to see your whole family. I'm going to hand over to Hannah now. It's been great talking to you, Matt. And Hannah will have some questions that people have put in, so I'll hand you over to her now. Well done. You've done a great job.
Great. Thanks, Colin.
Fantastic. Well, there are certainly some questions for you, Matt. So it's been fascinating listening to this so far. And I've actually had to Google a backfeet while Colin was just talking then, just so I could see. So it's worth doing, people, at the end of this, of course. So that's brilliant. I've learned something new tonight already. Okay, so we've got quite a few. So let's have a little looky. First question is this then. How much of a game plan did you have from the start, or to what extent did you make it up as you went along?
We had a reasonably clear. I mean, actually, I wrote a 15-year plan for the church, and then I broke it down into kind of 3 stages, sort of 0 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, and then 5 to 15. And the 0 to 2, we then kind of fleshed out a bit more, and we had sort of a few goals that we wanted to achieve, and we tried to do it in a way so that it wasn't a kind of a pressured thing, but just gave us a bit of a map to follow. And there were some times I looked at it, I didn't look at it a lot, but there are a few times I looked at it and thought, oh goodness, we're never going to get here. But now after 2 years looking back, I think we pretty much achieved it, and God was really gracious to us. But so yeah, we did have a pretty clear plan, but at the same time, lots of things happen that you can't plan for, that you can't imagine. And I think that's often when you need, I think it's when you need good support, really. I mean, when you talk to other church planters, that's one of the main things that comes back is the big reason church plants fail is that people don't have people to turn to, whether it's a coach or just someone who can give them advice, someone who's done it before. So having people you can say, goodness, this has happened, what do we do, was really helpful for us.
Yeah. And so you also had this game plan. Is that because you did a lot of asking questions of other church planters before you went? Did you do quite a lot of research and talking to people?
Yeah, I did. So I think because we'd always felt some sort of call towards church planting, I kind of spent 10, 15 years before any book or any podcast or whatever, I would kind of lap it all up and just get as much info as we could. And then when we moved, one of the first things I did was try and meet with as many different church leaders in the city and other church planters and just ask them their experiences and what had they learned and what could they teach us, to just kind of gain as much knowledge as we could, really.
Okay, well that leads on very well to this question, which was, hey, is that Jo?
Yeah, Jo's just going to come and join us. She's literally just got back. She just cycled, so she might be catching her breath a bit.
Hey! Welcome to the broadcast. This is really exciting. We've heard a bit of your story, and now you've got the questions. So guys, if you've got a question that you want to put specifically to Jo, obviously, then feel free to type that too, and Jo, obviously, then just chip in. Matt, you've just talked about when you first arrived linking with other churches. One of the questions that came in was, what's it been like building links with the other churches? So if there's more you want to say on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think when I met with as many people as I could, and what I was looking for was people that could give us some good advice, and be friends, people that we could connect with. And to be honest, we got lots of advice, some of which was probably more discouraging than encouraging. People would say things like church planting doesn't work in Amsterdam, and Amsterdam's the graveyard of church plants and things, which I'm sure people would say that in lots of different cities. And I didn't find many people that we could call friends, but those we did, I then tried to invest as much in them as I could. We had one couple round for dinner, and I've taken various people out for coffee, and just tried to build friendship, really. Just because people that have walked the journey before, they've got so much experience to kind of lead on. Even people from sometimes quite different church backgrounds with a kind of different philosophy of ministry, they've still got a lot to teach you. And even now, there are people that I would say, "Oh, what did you do at this stage, and how did you find this?" and there's lots of advice to be had there.
Okay, that's really helpful. Now we've got Jo, there's one question that's quite good because it goes right back to the very beginning, where you talked about that you individually felt called to church plant before you even got together, and then had this growing sense of a call to, obviously then it became apparent it was moving to Amsterdam, to the Netherlands. What's that look like in terms of, what do you mean you kind of had this sense of call, and specifically to Amsterdam for each of you?
Good question. I think it started for me at about the age of 13. I moved to be part of a church plant with my family, which at 13 I thought was the worst thing that could possibly ever happen to me, from being taken out of a big church context with lots and lots of friends, great youth work, into just me in the youth work with my brother and 2 other boys, which was just like, what have you brought me to? But I think God did something in my heart in terms of reaching people, and being involved with something from the very beginning is so exciting and such a privilege to be. So we were with a couple, Maurice and Rachel Nightingale, who some of you know, and just they gave me opportunities. I was involved with kids work and involved in the worship band and stuff from quite a young age, and so I guess just saw the importance of church planting, and just getting a bigger reach of further and wide, just more front doors for people to walk into and discover who God is. And I think that just grew and grew in me in terms of, one day I'd love to do this, one day I'd love to be involved in creating an environment where people can come and feel at home and be in family, and get to do that from the very beginning. So I think it kind of started at the age of 13 and then just grew and grew. I think that's about it.
Fab. And what about you, Matt?
Ouch.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in a New Frontiers setting. New Frontiers kind of has church planting as part of its DNA, really. So I think as a child, particularly as a teenager, I kind of just assumed that's what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Surely that's what we're all supposed to do, right? Let's you read the Book of Acts. Surely we're all supposed to go and plant churches.
Oh, I love
that. So I think I just had that expectation, really.
Yeah.
And then God kind of quickened me and excited me about it, I'm sure. But I think it always just felt like this is what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And every time, even as a teenager, if I heard someone talking about church planting, I'd want to hear about it. If I heard, it was just like a buzzword for me that always sort of triggered me, and I just wanted to know more about it, really. And I mean, as well, my parents had been involved in church planting when I was probably when I was too young to even remember. But I think it was just something that was kind of in our DNA in terms of the sort of church we were in, and just from for both of us and for our families, it was just kind of assumed and part of who we were, really.
Yeah, fabulous. Wow, that's really fascinating. Having had a very similar experience myself, I totally hear where you're coming from. Okay, so we've got a question about recruiting and the initial kind of group of families that kind of came with you within the first kind of weeks, months. How did you connect with them? Because you said you were meeting with them kind of in a hangout type thing. Did you specifically recruit them to come with you? Were they from your home church, or were they people that were just intending to move to Amsterdam and just kind of heard on the whispering wind that you were moving? And what did that look like?
Yeah, it was a bit of a mixture. We sort of we announced we were going a year before we left, and we began to pick up a few people that were interested at that point. There was one. We approached lots of people directly, and most of whom haven't spoken to me since. we did recruit one family who are now with us, who I don't think would have even really thought about it, and we just over several months managed to convince them that it was the right thing to do, and obviously God spoke as well. They're here with us. And then we had other people. We had one family from England who were already planning to move here anyway. They didn't. They wanted to be involved in church planting. Knew they weren't going to lead one, but had kind of set their sights on going and weren't quite sure how it was all going to work out. So when they heard we were going, I think they were just relieved and could kind of see how God was bringing things together. We had another couple where the guy was in a church he was Dutch but was in Cape Town at the time. And for lots of Dutch people, Amsterdam, it isn't a place that you want to go. It's got for many Dutch who live outside of the cities, it hasn't got the best of reputations. And people tend to be say, oh, well, I wouldn't want to go there. And he had that sort of attitude, oh, I'd love to go church planting, but not in Amsterdam. Why would you want to go to that city? It's a horrible place. And somebody kind of confronted him quite directly and provoked him about it, and God just put it on his heart. So again, he moved back from South Africa to Holland, wanting to be involved in a church plant, wanting to go to Amsterdam. And again, when he heard we were going, it just kind of ticked all the boxes. So God just sort of arranged people in the right places. And then we held like an Amsterdam day about 6 months before we moved, and then so we managed to kind of define, maybe there was about 10 people, I think, that came to that we were pretty sure we were going to join us. And then we started doing this Google Hangout, I think it was either every other week, where we would just sit for an hour on a Tuesday night and do like a small group online, which just kind of really cemented everybody's involvement, and people just got to know each other and kind of felt part of it.
It's good.
Fab. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I love in the whole technology thing in terms of connecting with people. It's massively helpful. Jo, there's a question for you which has come in, which Matt talked about his experience as a father watching the kids, all your lovely girls, obviously cope with the change, the transition, the language, and obviously how painful that was. And he talked about the story with the bike, and he was cycling back and kind of quite cross. What's that been like for you as a mum, kind of helping your kids, supporting your kids through this?
Yeah, I think God has taken me to an incredibly vulnerable place of real complete and utter dependence on him. I think before we came here, I felt like I was quite able, quite what's the word?
Capable?
Yeah, quite capable. And then got to this and was like, I have no idea how to parent you through this. As a mum, you just want to fix stuff. You just want to just wrap them up. Like the first days of school, Matt and I both wore sunglasses home because we'd just be sobbing, just like, oh, we've left our kids in these environments that just feel like home. So I think on the one hand it's been awful, but on the other hand it's kind of, it reveals some more and more of what God's like and what he's like with me, and in turn trying to help them to know what he's like with them. And so it grounds so much stuff that you think you know about what God's like, to then actually working it out and it connecting with your heart. And so the girls have been amazing. Like they're just, they're more pioneering than we are. I've just been at school sitting in for 2.5 hours listening to Dutch, being like, oh gosh, this is taking all my brain power to process, and then thinking this is what they were doing like 2 years ago, just sitting, trying to process, just trying to connect. So yeah, fiercely proud of just how amazing they are, I think, is probably the thing as well. But yeah, it's been really hard to watch, but actually just thinking, actually God, you're deepening their understanding of who you are by the journey that they're going on. So there's a song that our eldest, whenever she's kind of going through a squeeze point, goes and listens to, that I believe that you are good. And you're just like, actually, God, you're teaching her that you're good in the midst of what feels horrible, what feels painful. Actually, you don't change, you stay the same. And so, yeah, I'm trusting that God's doing stuff in them that we can't see yet and couldn't possibly imagine, but also thinking, one day, like Matt and I had it in our DNA that isn't that what everyone does, that they go church planting, that, one day will have 4 daughters who want to go on adventures and go build things with God. You just don't know. You don't know what's in store. So yeah, incredibly painful, but knowing that God's good and He's got them and we don't.
Yeah. Perhaps I can introduce one of them to my son at some point. My hope is that mine will go on and do something similar too. Right, support for yourselves, that's the next question. What support have you had for yourselves personally from individuals maybe or churches? What's that look like as you've moved continents?
Yeah. So I think, shall I go first? So for me, I still FaceTime with someone back in the UK every other week, an older lady, just a few stages on in life. She's now a granny. So just further on the journey and kind of marriage and parenting and that kind of thing. But she was someone I used to regularly meet with when we still lived in Brighton. And so I just said, look, I still need you to ask me difficult questions and prod me and, you know, encourage me, you know. So we just still prayed together on FaceTime every other week. And so for me, that's just been amazing. And she's been out to visit, hopefully is coming out again next month. But yeah, just kind of maintained that kind of mothering figure, and then kind of just wider than that, you know, still in touch with the team back in the UK in Brighton, and you know, and friendships as well. So I've got a friend who's church planting in Newbury, and we don't connect loads, but when we do, it's just, you know, that just catching up from where we left off. And so it's just encouraging as well, just listening to their story and hearing the journey that they're on and being able to share that as well is really precious. So yeah, some key friendships that just women who speak into my life and speak encouragement, even if it's just a normal conversation. There's just pearls to be taken away from having a quick half an hour FaceTime with them or anything. So yeah, that's been my key support.
Yeah, the church in Brighton have given us lots of support and have visited regularly, and I've been back there. We've been back there a few times. They've been excellent. I think one thing is when you go church planting, having other church planters that you know that you can be in touch with, I found so helpful, because many of them will either even at the same time be going through very similar experiences, or they might be a few years down the road and have been through similar experiences. And you find there are just lots of challenges and tests that churches tend to go through in their early years, and having other people that have walked that path, I found really helpful. I mean, at the same time, you do have to learn how to kind of feed yourself.
Yes, true.
You know, so I mean, I found I came from a context where I'd be in so many kind of early morning prayer meetings and things that even my own devotional life was kind of built around the church's kind of prayer calendar and schedule. And taking all those things away, I sort of had to figure out, well, what does it look like now? How do I rebuild a devotional life? How do we build that into our new church? But how do we, you know, as a couple, how do we pray together? How do I pray together? So you do have to learn and be quite deliberate in new rhythms and learning how to support yourself. And still just being brave enough when you need it to ask people for help, and building support within our team as well, and building just good relationships where we're open and honest with one another. Yeah, I could say a lot more about that, but I'll stop.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's a question that's coming about kind of more of kind of the spiritual side of things, I guess. Someone's asked, you mentioned Habakkuk. Did you have any other touchstone verses for the plant or for your family?
Yeah, I found in the early couple of months, I found Hebrews 11 incredibly helpful, where it talks about the kind of the heroes of the faith. I can't remember the exact verse, but it says somewhere near the end, you know, that these guys kind of they moved, they sort of went on an adventure, and they didn't actually get to see what they were involved with. I'm not quoting it very well, but there's that sense of, in the Bible, there's so much movement and pioneering that goes on. If you think of the story of Moses and Abraham, all the way through the Bible. There are so many stories of people that took big steps, even in the Old Testament stories, towards the Promised Land and never actually saw what God had put on their heart. And I found processing the feeling of I don't feel at home. You find that when you move to a new place, particularly when you move to a new country. There's, when am I going to feel at home? When am I going to feel settled? And what does that look like? And actually beginning to process, I'm not supposed to feel at home here. God's prepared another home for me, an eternal home. And actually, till I get there, it's okay if I don't feel at home. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with feeling settled and comfortable somewhere. But that kind of beautiful future heavenly reality really, really fed me at that time and really blessed me, because I thought I don't need to feel at home. That's such an earthly thing to pursue. God's not told us to pursue feeling comfortable. He's told us to kind of fix our eyes on what lies ahead. Yeah. So learning to do that, I found a real encouragement. And then from the church, before we moved, God spoke to us from the end of Jude, where it says, it's got some quite dramatic verses about kind of rescuing people, even kind of sort of grabbing people out of the kind of grips of hell is kind of the way the verse speaks. And that really spoke to us about what we're to do here in this city. Because there's so much about this city which is horrible. I've talked already about how beautiful it is, but there's some real broken bits, some real depravity. There's the famous horror of the red light district, which is a bleak, not very nice place at all. But yet we do feel a sense of, no, God's put us here for a purpose. We've come to rescue people. So that spoke to us as well.
Yeah. I think for me, I lived with just trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he'll make your path straight. And I just think, do you know what, God, sometimes I have no idea what you're doing, but I'm just going to trust you and trust that you're good and hold on to that, and knowing that, and even that, and then in all things he's working for the good of those he's loved and called according to his purposes. And it's like, you didn't just call us, you called our whole family, and so you're working for their good as well and for your glory, not for comfort, but for him to be glorified in this city. So, but that in that it'll be good for us. So, yeah, in the mysteries, those two, for me.
Yeah, fabulous. Massive encouragement. We're just going to coming towards the end of our time. I know that there's a couple more questions, but what really was important is that, Matt, you mentioned about connecting with other church planters, and obviously, Jo, you also said about the importance of connecting with your friend that's church planting. Obviously, we're massive fans of that, obviously, why we do the broadcast. But if, Jo, because we missed kind of some of what perhaps you would have shared, if you could speak, like we've got many people listening tonight and people will be catching up afterwards, and you were able to say, and this obviously is to you, Matt, as well, what would you kind of, an encouragement you have for those that are on the cusp of it, or perhaps they're just in their first year or two of church planting? What kind of core encouragement would you want to give to them this evening?
I think...
I know I put you on the spot.
No, it's good. I think just that you get to lean on the fact that God said he'll build his church, and we just get to join in. Like, such a privilege to be part of the adventure, like in all the squeeze points, in all the tough things. You think, do you know what, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I wouldn't want to do anything else. Like when God gets hold of you for something and for purpose, and you know that you've been called and you know that he's spoken, actually he said he'll build his church, and he's invited us to join in that. And so I think, just lean on that he's going to do it, and you don't have to strive, you don't have to try harder, you don't have to jump through hoops or read the right books or say the right things, because actually there's hearts that he's preparing for you to speak into and to change and to shape that, still we have no idea about, and yet God said he'll build his church, and he will, and he is.
I think to say to kind of people who are going on the cusp of going, particularly those with families, which is probably most people really who are church planting, it can feel, there can be lots of excuses for not going, because it can feel like it's not the right time for us, it's not the right time for the kids. And in some ways, there's never a right time to do something like this. But if God's in it, then there's never a wrong time to do it. So, and I think as well, just going with the mentality that we are all of it. As a family, we're called to do this. Yeah. I met one church partner who was here in the city very early on, and he said to me, "Well, you know, I'm called to do it, but my family aren't. They're just following me. I'm the one that's got the calling." And I thought that was such a sad way to look at it, and quite a limiting way. And in the end, sadly, him and his family have gone. They've left the city and gone back to their home because their children didn't settle. Whereas we saw it as, no, we were all called to be here, and we're here on mission together. Yeah. And actually, particularly in the early months, some of the most difficult things that happened in the first kind of 3 or 4 months of our church plant were all the things that our children did, not us.
Yeah,
you know, true. We were kind of sitting on thinking, well, this church planting is easy. You know, we're not doing anything. We're just sort of sitting around eating lots of food, and yet our kids were the ones who were doing the most difficult parts of it. Yeah. So I think just having a mentality, you know, God's called us as a family. Yeah. We're on mission as a family. We're going to do this together. And actually, you know, you're crazy to not realise that one of the main ways we interact with people who don't know Jesus, and definitely the main way the kids do, is through the kids, is through their school. So that's the main way we're kind of on mission here, isn't it? As being a family. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is brilliant, because this is our final question that we've got, unless anything else pops up in the last 30 seconds. But it is about the family. So just a comment on this to finish would be great. You spoke about trying to get your kids as involved as possible in the church. What does it actually look like in practice? So obviously you've just talked about that, but was there anything practical you want to add on for that person?
I think it's, you know, it probably doesn't seem like big things, but little things like they help put out the chairs, and they help put out the song words and the business cards, and they shared their home with like everybody for the first year, bless them. So I think, and then, you know, and they pray with us, and we pray with them for, you know, specific types of people that we want to join the church. So I think, they're small things but important things. So there's just little practical things that they do, but also just, you know, they share their mum and dad on a Sunday morning with the whole church too. And
and we've just tried to sort of help them to see what God's doing as well. So like even today, someone in the church had given me a bit of paper with some sort of stats, like attendance stats. I love stats, kind of a bit geeky. And I sat down and showed our oldest two. I said, look, just have a look at this and see what God's been doing, and kind of showed her the graph, and I think it's been brilliant for them to see, and they can really see it, like, oh wow, look at what God's done. So just learning to kind of celebrate with them as well, good. Helps them to really feel part of things. Sorry, that was your time.
Twice.
Super. You were fighting there, are you, under the table?
I just stood on my foot again.
Well, we've come to the end of this broadcast. Honestly, guys, you are absolute heroes. Have you enjoyed this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been great fun. For my bit,
I'm so hoping that we've had quite a number of people watching tonight, and so thank you to everybody who's been listening and asking questions. But I really, our hope is that obviously this will encourage and provoke and stir many people as obviously they log on afterwards and catch up on what they've missed this evening. So just, a massive thank you. Involvement at the beginning, and just appreciate real honesty and just your real obedience of what we called you to. So we just pray that you know the grace in Amsterdam. So thank you guys. Wow. I hope you guys have taken a lot away from that. I know that I have, and know that we'll be for those guys in Amsterdam. Matt and Jo and their 4 girls. There. Just some little bits to finish. Next month, we're going to be focusing on multiplication. So we will be giving my friend Tom is going to be speaking. That will be on the 13th of October. That's Tom O'Toole from Manchester. We're going to be laying the biblical foundations of multiplication. And very exciting, another date is the 20th of October, when we'll be having some real practical, what does this look like in reality for planters. So both those dates for your diary, the 13th and the 27th. There is just one room left available for the Church Planters Weekend, which is the 21st and the 22nd of October. Details are on the website. Please, and Matt just said brilliantly how valuable it is to connect with other people that are doing the same journey and learning from each other's experiences. If you are around and free and available, you can book yourself and you can get that last room. And finally, to stay in touch, stay connected. It's not just about the twice monthly sessions here. We have a podcast. So go onto the website, broadcast network, click on the podcast and follow the instructions, and it will tell you all about how to sign up for that, so you can be staying in touch, staying tuned in throughout the next week and months. So thanks very much for listening. We are looking forward to the next session. It's been a brilliant evening. Bye bye for now.